her preparation and her performance, she came up with, which was, the central question. Okay, we put a man into space, but how do we get him back to Earth safely?
Katherine Johnson and the West Area Computers. Katherine Johnson was part of a team of African American women who worked to fight discrimination and stereotypes by working on space calculations at NASA. Growing up in West Virginia, Katherine Johnson began her interest in mathematics when she was a little girl. She was only 10 years old when she finished 8th grade and finished high school at 14. Katherine Johnson eventually enrolled into West Virginia State University, where she began researching all things mathematics. During this time, World War II was commencing and the U.S. was involved. As the war continued, the president at the time, Franklin Roosevelt, issued an Executive Order 8802, which prohibited racial discrimination in the employment of workers. Months later, NASA, also then known by NACA, and Langley Research Center started hiring African American women with degrees in mathematics as human computers.
How that came to be, populated just by Black women is interesting, because it seems like it was almost like they looked at them, even though these women had incredible mathematical skills, but they almost looked at them like as if they were secretaries or just clerical workers.
These African American women who worked as computers were segregated from the white computers and had their own area on the Langley Research Campus. This area became to be known as the West Area Computers, a group full of African American women who did calculations for NASA. Katherine Johnson was hired at NASA in 1953, and her first big assignment was to calculate the trajectories for Alan Shepard's space flight on Freedom 7 in 1961.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, lift off and the clock is started.
His successful flight was a nationwide celebration, as this had been the first time an American man had been in space. A year later, Katherine got asked to calculate John Glenn's orbit around the Earth.
Publicity. In the capsule atop the Atlas missile, the Colonel will be strapped to a contoured couch. Once in flight, the Mercury will be tilted so that the astronaut will ride backwards. The seconds tick off as his rendezvous with space approaches. The hatch cover causes a slight delay when a defective bolt is discovered. Then, millions are moved to silent prayer. Everything is go. The takeoff of the Atlas, blasted off by 360,000 pounds of thrust, carries the Mercury gracefully skyward.
His successful orbit brought her many more opportunities after that. She was also on the team that calculated for the Apollo 11 and the Apollo 13. Katherine Johnson amazed many by being an African American woman and calculating equations some would deem impossible.
Obviously, it was Katherine's formulation with the assistance of everyone else, but it was her initiative, right? And her idea to let's use this particular formula, to help bring him, to help come up with the answer for how we're going to get this man safely, back into Earth after, we've put him out into space. So obviously, that whole mission. She had a major part in the success of that particular mission. And then I would imagine then any subsequent, missions into space, that they had.
Due to Katherine Johnson taking a stand, she impacted NASA in the way it was shaped. A short-term effect that she had on NASA was she successfully calculated the trajectories for both Alan Shepard and John Glenn. John Glenn even stated, "Get the girl to check the numbers," referring to Katherine. He would not go in flight unless she checked the numbers herself. Alan Shepard's flight in space would not have been successful if it wasn't for Katherine's numbers. A long-term effect that she had on NASA was the increase of African Americans at NASA. After her impact on NASA, more and more African American men and women at NASA have been given more opportunities you would not see African Americans get often. In 1983, Guy Bluford became the first African American to fly in space, followed by May Carol Jemison 10 years later, being the first African American woman to travel in space. NASA is now a more diverse place filled with employees of all different races and ethnicities. The West Area Computers were a team of African American women who worked to fight discrimination and stereotypes. Katherine Johnson did that by working on space calculations at NASA. Katherine Johnson had changed how NASA was shaped and changed how people thought about the world. She took a stand against people who doubted her because she was African American and she was a woman. This should teach people to never give up on your dreams, even if they seem too far in reach.
Black women, or particularly young black women your age, even as they're making choices, not even just career, but just begin through these women's stories to see themselves in more expansive ways, and maybe even more so than society, and maybe even more so than even the black community allows them to see themselves. That there are things, there are, areas, there are careers, there are different things that we can do in life, much more oftentimes than I think society allows young black women to think that they can do. That this film will show them that there are a lot more opportunities out